Hello, everyone, I'm Kenshin. Welcome to Talking History. Please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Thank you. Today's historical discussion is the biggest airlift in history, the Berlin Blockade. For the past couple of years, Russia and the West have been fighting over Ukraine, and Kenshin believes that the ordinary people of both countries are the biggest victims. The damned are only decision-makers like Putin. However, in the face of Russia's relentless aggression, to ensure that Ukraine can continue to resist, it is crucial to deliver a large amount of military and general supplies before the Ukrainian supply lines are cut off by the Russian military. We can see that more than 17,000 anti-tank weapons, including Javelin missiles, were transported to Poland and Romania's borders via giant military transport planes and delivered to Kyiv and other major cities by land. The New York Times pointed out that scenes of secret shipments of weapons on this scale seem to replicate the Berlin Airlift. It was from 1948 to 1949 when the Soviets wanted to control the whole of Berlin. They decided to blockade the roads leading to West Berlin, prompting the Western Allies to launch the largest airlift operation in history to supply West Berlin with goods. To talk about this matter, we need to briefly mention the background. From July 17 to August 2, 1945, the Allies reached the Potsdam Agreement, dividing post-war Germany west of the Oder-Neisse line into 4 temporary occupation zones, administered respectively by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin was also divided into 4 occupation zones, with the western part of the city controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, and the eastern part by Soviet forces. According to the agreement, Germany's future was to be determined by elections, but the brutal behavior of the Soviet troops, who raped and looted when they attacked Berlin, apparently made the Berliners extremely wary. In the local elections of 1946, the Soviet-supported Socialist Unity Party of Germany only obtained less than 1/5 of the vote. But the Soviets were not satisfied with this situation. In June 1945, Stalin informed the leaders of the German Communist Party at a meeting that Britain's position in the occupation zone would be weakened, and the United States would withdraw within 2 years, by which time there would be no obstacles to German unification, meaning that Germany would become a Soviet satellite. The Soviets then reduced the routes for transporting goods from European countries. In 1946, the Soviets stopped transporting agricultural products from the areas in eastern Germany, and the American commander, Lucius D. Clay, decided to stop transporting dismantled industrial equipment from western Germany to the Soviet Union due to various problems. The war-torn Berlin's population decreased from 4.3 million before the war to 2.8 million. In early 1948, Britain, the United States, and France secretly reached an agreement in London to issue the German mark within the occupation zones. Learning of this, the Soviet Union decided to withdraw from the Allied Control Council, and even banned the use of the German mark in its occupation zone and the city of Berlin. But little did they know that Britain, the United States, and France had secretly transported large quantities of new banknotes to West Berlin, intending to officially circulate them in June of the same year. In addition to issuing the East German mark, the Soviet Union also began to restrict the transport of all goods to Berlin by land and waterways. On March 25, 1948, the Soviet Union ordered the restriction of Western military and civilian traffic between the Western occupation zones and Berlin, and announced that from April 1, no goods could leave Berlin by rail without the permission of the Soviet commander, and every train and truck had to be searched by Soviet authorities. In other words, they intended to block the supply of goods to the Western occupation zones. But these 3 countries had no way to protest because the Potsdam Conference did not stipulate that the West had the right to use transportation to reach Berlin. Previously, it relied on Soviet permission to allow supplies and personnel to reach West Berlin. That is to say, this blockade was entirely justifiable, except for one loophole. That is, the 4 countries reached an agreement that, for aviation safety, Britain, the United States, and France could use 3 20-mile-wide air corridors to enter and exit West Berlin, namely from Hamburg, Buchberg, and Frankfurt to Berlin, becoming the only remaining communication channels for West Berlin. On June 24, 1948, the Soviet Union completely cut off the Western occupation zones and West Berlin's railway, road, and canal traffic. Since most of Berlin's power plants were in East Berlin, they also cut off the electricity supply to West Berlin. At that time, West Berlin only had 36 days of food and 45 days of coal. Compared to the surrounding 1.5 million Soviet troops, it was essentially defenseless. At the time, General Lucius D. Clay, the commander of the U.S. occupation forces in Germany, informed Washington that showing weakness by withdrawing from West Berlin was absolutely unacceptable. There is also a saying that President Truman ordered that West Berlin must not be abandoned. But how to transport supplies became controversial. It was finally decided to airlift because the 20-mile air corridors were guaranteed in black and white. According to regulations, the Soviet Union could not interfere. If they shot down Western aircraft, atomic bombs might be used on the Soviet Union, just like what happened in Japan. As for the details of the supply, General Clay told the newly elected mayor, Rohr, that the United States cannot guarantee that the airlift will be successful. Even in the best conditions, the people of West Berlin may still suffer from hunger and cold. If we are to do this, you must do your best to ensure that the people of West Berlin cooperate. The mayor, who was skeptical of using airlift to support Berlin, replied, "Berlin will make the sacrifices it should, and the people will support the action. You just take care of the airlift, and let me take care of the people of Berlin." On June 25, the U.S. military officially began Operation Vittles, with the first batch of 32 C-47 transport planes carrying 80 tons of food arriving in Berlin the next day. British aircraft began transporting supplies several days later, and the French, who were fighting communist guerrillas in Indochina, could only provide a small number of old transport planes. However, French engineers in the French occupation zone built a new airport in West Berlin, allowing the British and American air forces to carry out more missions. But in order to expand the scale of the airlift and to deter the Soviet Union from trying to stop the airlift, President Truman dispatched a batch of B-29 bombers to the UK, claiming that they were capable of carrying atomic bombs. In fact, these bombers were not capable of carrying atomic bombs, and the ones that could would not arrive until April 1949. But there is a little story in this operation. Lieutenant Halverson, a U.S. Air Force pilot, after several transport missions, chatted with the children of West Berlin. Before leaving, he wanted to give these children some food. When he touched his pocket, he only had 2 pieces of Wrigley's chewing gum. So he said to the children, "I'll give you some gum, but you have to promise not to fight over it." The children promised and received the chewing gum, tearing it into small pieces to share in an orderly manner. Those who didn't get any held onto the wrappers, inhaling the sweet scent. Seeing this scene, he wanted to do something more for them. So he said, "Tomorrow I'll fly over again, and I'll drop candy for you." One of the children asked, "How will we know which plane is yours?" He replied, "I'll wiggle my wings." Back at the base, he went to the base welfare store to buy candy. Since sugar was a controlled strategic material, candies were rationed even for military personnel. Unable to buy too much, he returned to the dormitory and asked his comrades if they could lend him their ration cards. After they understood the situation, they all agreed. With these ration cards, he bought a lot of candies of all kinds and started thinking about how to airdrop them. Although candies were not heavy, they had gravitational acceleration, and there was a risk of injuring the children. With a sudden inspiration, he made handkerchiefs into small parachutes and experimented, and they indeed floated down slowly. On July 18, 1948, just before landing, he began to wiggle his wings, asking other comrades to open the rear cargo compartment of the plane and throw out the small parachutes. A group of West Berlin children gathered outside the fence of Tempelhof Airport in the suburbs of Berlin, eagerly watching as plane after plane landed, and when they saw one plane constantly wiggling its wings, the children cheered loudly, watching as the rear cargo compartment of the plane opened, and several mini parachutes slid down from the sky. But this was a violation of regulations. After the incident was exposed, the occupation zone newspapers reported a candy bombing, and the operations center of the U.S. military aviation base in West Berlin received thank you letters from the citizens of West Berlin. Lieutenant Halvorsen was inevitably called in by his superiors, scolded severely, and even threatened with court-martial. But when the headquarters of the U.S. forces in Europe learned about it, they were very pleased with this positive report on the image of the U.S. military and airlift missions, and supported him to continue. The commander even said that everyone should come together to drop candies. From then on, this activity officially became an ancillary mission of the U.S. Air Force, and all pilots were encouraged to send candies to the children of West Berlin as long as it did not interfere with transport missions. Soon, after seeing this report in the United States, many children donated candies to the occupation zone, and then several major candy companies donated large quantities of candies. Even elementary school students made small parachutes in class and sent them with candies to the occupation zone. It was surprising that a few years ago, when the children of West Berlin heard the sound of aircraft engines, they only knew it was bomb raids, but now when they heard it, it was another kind of bombing. Candies, which represented hope for the future, thus unexpectedly shattering the Soviet Union's goal of making people surrender by cutting off hope. Lieutenant Halvorsen later was promoted to colonel and became the commander of Tempelhof Airport, where he met those West Berlin children. After retiring, he often went to Berlin to participate in activities. On February 17, 2022, in a hospital in Utah, Colonel Halvorsen, who was 101 years old, bid farewell to the world. Good people get good rewards, which is the best proof. Why could the U.S. military deliver military supplies to Ukraine within 48 hours? This is because there were already stocks in NATO bases, and using C-17 transport planes and other cargo planes to fly directly to bases in NATO countries like Poland and Romania, they could be quickly delivered through these places, which also broke the idea of the Russian attacking supply lines. The best proof is that Ukrainian soldiers used shoulder-fired Javelin anti-tank missiles to attack Russian armored logistics convoys, and even Russian fuel supply lines were bombed. Scared Russian soldiers even abandoned their vehicles on the spot. This time, Russia must collapse economically, and these oligarchs must be completely removed, otherwise, this region will never have peace.